Hi everyone, in this tutorial we're going to create textures for our lightning strike. So we're going to jump into Substance and going to create couple variations of the textures that we're going to apply later on onto the meshes that we're going to create in Houdini for the lightning strike. As you can see here as well, I've got some lightnings that are actually happening on the ground. So we're going to create those meshes as well in Houdini. And I think we're gonna create a video as well how to make this very simple rock generator so you could use those in your effects. Right, so let's maybe start with the texturing part. So I'm gonna jump into Substance now and let's create those textures. So I actually want to show you two techniques how to achieve those lightning lines in your texture. So let's start maybe with the simple one. So I'm gonna bring the pedaling noise. I wanna run it through cross-section. Some people mentioned they actually don't have access to the cross-section node. So right after this technique, I'm gonna show you another technique how to achieve similar results without using the cross-section. But for now, let's maybe try to focus on this simple technique. So I'm gonna select cross-section, scroll down, drawing style, I'm gonna change it to mirrored, enable polygonal, and decrease the segment amount maybe to 8. I'm gonna run it through histogram scan, max the contrast and lower the position to get something like this. And I want to run it through warp. I'm gonna bring the cell 1 as well and transform right after. Under transform, I'm gonna actually scale it horizontally, so I want to apply maybe 200 to my width for that cells node, and I'm going to run it through blur as well. So I'm going to zero the blur just to show you what it does. Plug it into warp, double click, and under warp I'm actually going to change the intensity to 3. So as you can see, we're kind of getting crazy results. So maybe let's reduce the cells to, let's try maybe 6, maybe 8, so we get a bit more details, because bear in mind this is stretched texture. And now if you go to your blur node and start increasing the intensity, you can see we kind of getting a bit more rounded and softer results through our warp. So let's increase the intensity and let's reduce the cells actually to maybe 5. Right, so for the warp, I'm just going to increase it again. I don't know what happened, but it seems like it zeroed my results. So I'm going to reduce it, increase it to maybe 3. And keep changing the slider. I'm going to maybe get something like around 3 and then reduce the blur to see what it does. I just want a little bit of warp there. Right, so now maybe go back to your cross section and increase the segment amount to, let's try 12. And reducing the scale of the pedaling noise might help with the look of it as well. And now you can play with the disorder to get a slightly different look of your lightning line. Also under cross section, you've got this slider here, and you could use that one as well. Cool. So that's one of the techniques. Also, what I'm going to do, I'm just going to copy and paste this setup here and blend those two together using add and blending mode. Double click, I'm going to go to pedaling noise, change the disorder of it slightly, cross section as well. And actually, I'm going to try to decrease the amount of segments. And under histogram scan, I'm just going to reduce the position because I want this to be not as thick as our other line. And for the warp, let's try to increase that one so we could get a bit more variation as well. Maybe increasing the cells might help. So let's try 12. That's way too much. So maybe 8. And I think that could work. Okay, I'm gonna change the disorder of that parallel noise just a little bit. And I quite like this sort of look for the lightning. Right, so this was the technique number 1. And now I'm just gonna show you how to achieve similar look through technique without using the cross section. So I'm going to zoom in a little bit and bring the shape node here. I'm gonna decrease the size on the Y axis. I'm gonna run it through transform, and under transform I'm actually gonna increase the width of it. Okay, so I end up having 2048 by 1024. So at the end of this video, I'm actually gonna rotate this texture 90 degrees to mimic how the lightning actually is gonna look like. So it's gonna come from top to the bottom, and it will be very long mesh. That's why I need this texture to be long as well, just so I could pack a little bit more data into that texture in case I wanna tile it later on in the engine. So spotting the repetition might be slightly difficult. Okay, so after this, I actually want to run this through warp, and I'm gonna bring cells 1 and plug it into the warp. I'm gonna reduce the scale on that cells to maybe 5 or even lower, maybe 3. And now under warp, I'm just gonna plug 5 intensity and gonna keep increasing it until I'm gonna see a dotted line. So I'm gonna increase it even further, so you can see once I plug in 20 into intensity, you can see those dotted line appears, and I need to only have this line. So I think this works. Sometimes it won't be that easy to achieve those results. So for example, if I add some disorder, you can see that line actually disappears. So you have to keep tweaking it until you're gonna find this line, and now it might be even more difficult to achieve that line. You can see I'm just scrolling up to even 50 almost intensity, and I cannot find this line. So if you stuck at this point, feel free to just go into cells, change the disorder until you will get something closer to this dotted line. And now maybe I'm gonna go back here, keep increasing it, and that's it. I got this line now. I'm gonna try with a different scale as well, maybe 5, to see how difficult it might be to actually achieve that line, and it's almost impossible now. So maybe 4. Okay, so this seems to be close, and now I'm just gonna play with the disorder settings just to see if I can maybe get a little bit closer. Right. Cool. So it's doable. You just need to play with the settings until you find something a bit more suitable. Okay, so now I'm just gonna run it through edge detect, invert it, and change the edge width. And we end up with having that kind of line. Next, I'm just gonna run it through warp. And what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna go back to our previous settings. I'm gonna copy paste this setup for the cells, transform, and the blur. Paste it here and plug it into the warp. And for the warp, I'm actually gonna increase the intensity to 5. And I wanna disable the tiling as well on this node. I'm gonna reduce the blur. I think the intensity is too strong. And also I'm gonna reduce the scale maybe to 4 of that cells. Go back to warp and just play with the settings a little bit, like 3. So what I'm looking for right now is just to have like a variation in the thickness, right? So this is like very thick and it shrinks down here, and this is what I'm looking for. Right, so once I have this, maybe I'm just gonna level it a little bit. Okay, because I don't want too much variation at this point, okay? I just need just a little bit to break it. Right, and next thing actually is I'm gonna run it through tile sampler. But I want to plug this into the mask map input. double click, change the pattern to disk, and the amount maybe to 7 by 7. I'm gonna scroll down where you can see the size. I'm gonna reduce the Y size of it to maybe 0.5. I'm gonna randomize the scale and the randomize size random as well. Position random, just gonna max it. I'm gonna go down where is the mask map threshold, gonna increase it to 1 and invert that map using this button. Now I'm just gonna use the blend node and I'm gonna select subtract. So as you can see, we kind of subtracting those circles from our main shape, which is what we want. But obviously they too small, so what I'm gonna do, I'm just gonna go into the tile sampler and increase the size or scale of those circles. So we're getting this. What you could do even to improve the look of it, you could just run this through bevel. Next, run it through histogram scan, and you're gonna get slightly thicker mask and plug this and use this as a mask. So now if you go here and start increasing the scale, I think you're just gonna get slightly better results. You might also increase now the amount of the discs. So I'm just gonna increase it maybe to 10 by 10. Maybe this mask is actually too thick now, so you can just play with the position, tone it down a bit. And as you can see, we're kind of getting those lines cutting into our main shape. Cool, so the next thing is I'm just gonna run it through another warp. I'm gonna copy the same setup for the noise, plug this in, but I'm gonna increase the cells scale now, because I want to actually break this line even further. So I'm gonna reduce the intensity on my blur, and I just need a little bit more variation. Maybe you're getting actually too many details through our warp, so I'm just gonna go back to cells and maybe reduce the scale to 10. And I think this is exactly what I was looking for. Let's see if we can actually tweak the tile sampler a little bit more. So maybe let's increase the Y amount. So I'm gonna keep X at 10, maybe 15 on Y amount, and increase the scale of it a little bit. And I think that's helping, so maybe let's reduce the Y amount. I'm actually gonna keep it maybe at 8. Want to see if increasing X might help, but it doesn't seem that I'm actually helping, so I'm just gonna keep it at 10 and 8. What I'm actually gonna do, I'm just gonna copy this setup here, run it like this, so I could get our line to be even thicker a bit, because this will be our main lightning. Lightning line. Okay, so let's go back to the tile sampler and let's maybe reduce the scale a little bit, so we're getting just a little bit of those circles cutting in. And if you want to change the position of it, just you see this position random, just adjust this slider until you'll be happy with the results. Okay, so I kind of like this, and now maybe it might be a good time to go back to our setup here and try to change the look of it. So I'm gonna play with the disorder settings on my cells 1 node, and I quite like this. In the warp as well, you can tweak a couple settings. Right, so I'm gonna keep this And I'm actually gonna merge it with our results from previous texturing setup. So I'm gonna blend it, and I'm gonna change the blending mode to add. So we're getting our main lightning here and those detailed passes as well. So let's run through the whole setup, and then we're just gonna go back and we're gonna keep adjusting the sliders until we'll be happy with the results of our texture. Right, so the next bit will be to add maybe some directional warp. And I'm gonna apply this setup here. I'm gonna change the intensity maybe to 20. You can play with the angles as well, however, I'm just gonna keep it simple and default value. Next, I'm just gonna run it through a directional blur. Okay. And now let's maybe try to blend this with our main setup. I'm gonna change this to max. So we're getting slight blur on some of the edges. And let's use blur to soften the look a little bit, and another blur with a very low value, maybe 1. I'm gonna blend those together again using the max setting for my blending mode, because I actually want to bring a bit more softness. And in here now I can just increase the intensity and getting this nice glowy edge. And let's maybe run it finally through gradient map so we could get some colors here. And I'm actually gonna select a dark blue, and in here it's gonna be very light blue color. I'm gonna increase the smoothness here. And decrease the soft blue. Actually, if we actually invert it, we're getting slightly better look, so that's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna run it through glow as well. For the glow, I'm just gonna pick some very light blue color. Increase the glow size. And maybe keep the clear amount to 0. Or actually that's too strong, so maybe 0.5. And at the end, I'm just gonna plug it into alpha merge. For the alpha, I'm just gonna pick our blend here. If you double click on this node, you can actually see we are having some alpha now. And at the very end, you can just rotate that texture 90 degrees, but you have to change the size of it here. Okay, just to make sure you export this with that kind of resolution, and you can obviously change the resolution later on in the engine. Okay, so now let's maybe try to tweak a couple settings that we exposed in this video. Try to get like a better look of that lightning texture. So I'm actually gonna double click on my transform and go back to the beginning of that setup, and I'm gonna try to maybe adjust some settings for the main strike, because I think it's a little bit too thick. So I could either tweak it here using my histogram and decrease it a little bit. And now I'm actually gonna go and try to adjust some of those details that we've created before. So I'm gonna select the first cross section and move this slider just a little bit to see if we could get a bit more interesting shape. So I quite like this, so I'm just gonna keep it. And for the other one, let's do the same thing. I quite like as is, but I want to see what we could get out of that. Okay, so I'm just gonna increase it or change the slider a little bit. To be honest, honest, I quite like this. However, I think it might be going a little bit to the left here. So what we could do, let's try maybe where we have this histogram scan, increase it or decrease that position. Okay, I quite like this, how it looks. Maybe the warp, let's decrease the warp. Or increase it, but let's decrease the cells scale. Okay, and now go back to histogram scan and maybe try to keep the lower value. Cross section, I actually wanted to change this to be a bit closer to our main strike. Right, I quite like this, and I quite like that it's actually not as thick as the other line. So what I'm gonna do, I'm just gonna bring our blend node here and run it through another blend node. I'm gonna make some space here. I'm gonna copy this lower setup, paste it, plug this into this blend mode, change the blend mode to add, and plug this one back in. I'm gonna select our transform and go to the setup that we've just made, because I want this additional line. So we're getting even bit more details. Right, so I quite like this. Maybe let's just reduce the histogram scan. I'll tweak some of the settings. So we can make it thicker if we want additional details. However, I just want to keep this a very thin line, just for some additional details. Right, so that will be our texture. And if you quite like this setup, what you could do is just copy paste and the whole setup, and then just go and manipulate some of those settings to get slightly different results. As you can see, I'm just moving sliders and it gives me slightly different look for my texture. Do the same thing for those detailed lightning strikes as well. And that will be the texture I'll be applying in the next video in Houdini, when we're actually going to create a mesh for our lightning strike. All right, thank you so much for watching. I hope you find this helpful.